Now, as we turn to section 107, we see a fairly major and significant foundational shift in how things are running and going to run in the church. Notice what we start with in the very beginning is one prophet, Joseph Smith. Then we call a second elder, Oliver Cowdery, to be the assistant. So we have the two presiding elders when the church is first set up.
You have 6 people.
6 people total.
1/3 of the members are actually in church leadership. That's a pretty good thing.
That's a pretty good number. And then you watch as he calls additional people. You get the 3 witnesses who way back when they had their experience, part of their calling, part of their responsibility, the agreement, they get all of these amazing things that they get to see and be a witness for. But one of their responsibilities is to seek out the 12 and find the 12 apostles. Well, it's taken them a while, and Oliver Cowdery is going to tell us that it has constantly been on their mind. They've been looking, who is it, Lord, that you have chosen, following that pattern from Acts chapter 1, where Peter and the apostles were trying to decide between 2 people and say, Lord, who did you pick? Who do you want? So they've been working on this effort for a long time. Then Joseph Smith goes with this group in Zion's camp that we talked about in last episode, and Joseph gets the cholera, terrible case of the cholera, and nearly dies. Now, we don't know the full extent of this because he doesn't tell us, but it seems that there's this thought of, wait a minute, if I did die, what would happen to the work that God is setting up here? And you'll notice that was the summer of 1834. Now, in section 107, we're now in the late winter, so February of 1835, where Joseph calls the 12 apostles on February 14th.
And what's amazing about this section is that you have a diffusion of God's power and authority now being spread throughout the church. Now, of course, God's power is everywhere, and God's power is priesthood power. And anytime you're doing any action in the power of God, that technically is priesthood power. There are offices that have specific responsibilities, but this is what we see, this glorious revelation where God is now providing clear structure, guidance, and official offices where it's now not just dependent on the life of one person, that it's the life and the body of the saints that will be able to endure no matter what happens to any of these individuals. There is a way for God's authority and work to persist and to preserve. This is one of my favorite sections.
It's amazing because he sets up this beautiful hierarchy
of equality.
Equal power. So you have the first presidency with a president and 2 counselors. Then you have the quorum of the 12 traveling high priests. We call them now the quorum of the 12 apostles, who we sustain as prophets, seers, and revelators. And then you have the 70 set up with 7 presidents. And the last of those presidents is called to preside over that quorum, and they have equal authority. And then you have the local stake presidencies and high council, and the stake presidency presides over the high council spread throughout the world, and that's going to come up here. And then we have these offices in the Aaronic priesthood and other offices we'll talk about in the Melchizedek priesthood. Section 107, it's a big deal as far as the hierarchy of the church is concerned. Now, at the outset, we need to make this really clear that you have the church and its structure, and then you have, let's just do it this way, then you have the home and its structure. Listen to this statement by President Boyd K. Packer in April 1998 General Conference. There is a difference in the way the priesthood functions in the home as compared to the way it functions in the church. In the church, there is a distinct line of authority. We serve, we're called, by those who preside over us. Then he goes on to say, in the home, it is a partnership with husband and wife equally yoked together. Listen to these words from President Delaney Chokes, given in the October 2005 General Conference. A most important difference in the functioning of priesthood authority in the family and in the church results from the fact that the government of the family is patriarchal, whereas the government of the church is hierarchical. The concept of partnership functions differently in the family than in the church. The family proclamation gives this beautiful explanation of the relationship between a husband and a wife. While they have separate responsibilities, in these sacred responsibilities, fathers and mothers are obligated to help one another as equal partners, that we may become one. That's the goal here, whether it's at home or whether it's at church. You'll notice that in councils of the church, it's going to function differently in the hierarchical structure or setup of that authority, that power of God given to people on the earth to act in His name for the salvation and the welfare of all of God's children, compared to how a husband and wife counsel together in love and righteousness. There is no first counselor in the home. There's no vice president in the home. It's an equal partnership moving the work of God forward in that home family setting, that familial setting of the priesthood. Now, let's talk about priesthood for a moment. It was Elder and Sister Renland. We've talked about this before, but Elder and Sister Renland, in their book about the Melchizedek priesthood, Elder and Sister Renland use this beautiful analogy of the earth. And then they use the analogy, if you go out and you pick up a little handful of dirt and you hold it, what do you say? Here's a little bit of earth. I'm holding the earth. But you don't imply that you're holding all of the earth in your hand. Whereas God, who is sovereign and the God of the universe, he even uses that analogy when he says, worlds without number have I made, and mine hand can hold them, and mine eye can pierce them. I know that I hold them all in my hand. But what does he give us? He gives a portion of that bigger earth. Well, if you translate that into a different area and say God's power is defined as the priesthood, the expansive, all-encompassing power of God to do all of God's work with all of the keys and the rights and the privileges and the authority, that would be called the priesthood of God. But what does he do? He gives us portions. He gives us access to his power, and we can then function in that power. Now, in the hierarchical church, as outlined in section 107, what we see is that he defines some priesthood offices to which men can be ordained, some keys of the priesthood which can be conferred on people, and then you get
men or women.
Men or women have this ability to function in the power of the priesthood, and we've had some beautiful talks given in General Conference from President Ballard, President Oakes, President Nilsson, and others talking about if you're functioning in a church calling, you are using the power of the priesthood, because there is no other power from God to do God's work. And his work and his glory is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. Any ministering, any nurturing, any speaking, any teaching, anything we do is done with that power of God given to us on the earth. Now stop and translate that for just a moment into a home setting. I'm not going to give any specifics, but there have been countless occasions when one child or another in our home has been struggling with something, whether it be emotionally or physically or mentally or spiritually, with temptation and other struggles. And I have watched as my dear wife has taken those children who are struggling under her wing and brought them into her power, where she'll listen to them and she'll counsel with them and she'll pray with them and she'll read scriptures with them. And sometimes she'll just let them talk and then express confidence in them. The best way to describe it is I have watched the power of our heavenly parents manifest over and over and over again as my wife has interacted with our children in moments of need. What power is that? It's not some ethereal, no-named power that's somewhere out there in the universe. It's priesthood power given to us to bless lives. Her very presence, just the fact that she's there, her spirit, her soul with this child, she becomes this shield of faith as she's helping that child manufacture their own shield of faith. It's as if her very presence is pushing back the forces of darkness and the forces of evil to help build up that child. Now, that's in a home setting. Think about every calling in the ward or in the stake or in the church for that matter. Somebody is called to do something. Well, what are they called to do? It's ultimately to push back the forces of darkness and to chase darkness from among people and to bring light and to be that refuge and to fortify their faith. What does it mean then when we get into this section 107, when we're going to talk about priesthood callings where somebody then presides? What is a bishop presiding? What does that mean? Next time you walk into a sacrament meeting, look up at the stand at your bishop or your branch president, and as he's sitting up there on the stand, drumming his fingers together greedily, looking at the crowd, thinking, look at all these people, what can I get from them? Brothers and sisters, to preside in the church, in the hierarchical church, doesn't mean that you're going to go in greedily trying to get anything from those whom you are called to preside over. Because keep in mind, if this were a kingdom of the world, that's how it would work. But we're not in a kingdom of the world where the king or the queen is the top dog. We're in the church in an inverted kingdom where the presiding authority stands at the head in the hierarchical organization, whether it be the Relief Society or the primary or the ward or the stake or the church in general. What it means to preside is it means to serve, to nurture, to bless, to teach, to persuade, to encourage. It's a lot of work. Sweet is the work. So when you walk into a sacrament meeting, look up at the stand and look at that branch president or that bishop. They're probably not looking with a covetous eye. They're probably looking with a prayerful eye, looking over that congregation, saying in their mind and in their heart, "Dear Lord, who needs help? Who's hurting? Who's struggling? Who needs some protection?" Or you go into a Relief Society meeting and that Relief Society president isn't sitting up there thinking, think of all the meals I can get from this. It's quite the opposite. It's, who needs me? Who can I help? Who can I bless? So as we jump into 107, we want to make this very clear. The power that is being given, the offices that are being held, the keys that are being given. Remember, keys do two things. They both lock and they unlock. You can unlock the powers of heaven in the lives of these people, and you can at times lock the gates of hell against those temptations and the powers of darkness and discouragement that are beating on the either your children or people you're called to serve. Keep in mind that all of this, let's not lose the point here of Section 107 and get so excited about the offices and the duties and the presidings and the authorities and the equality of the different quorums. The whole point of priesthood is God giving us godly power to do godly things. It's all an invitation to become more like Jesus. That's it. He's saying, I need you to be like me. And it's this invitation to come unto Christ. And one of the ways he does that in a hierarchical setting is through offices and keys. And he does it in the home, and he does it in communities, he does it in government. Anytime anybody's doing anything on the Lord's errand, they are using power of the priesthood, even though they may not be a priesthood holder in the office and key sort of realm that we're going to be talking about. But that's an important reminder for all of us, that we don't get so excited about the administration elements of the church that we overlook the fact that all of this is given as an invitation to become more like Jesus.